I opened my binder. It was labeled XDS, and the first thing I did, as a course of habit with any book, notebook, or otherwise, is to check every page inside and out. Apparently, whoever's idea this is knew I would do this because mine conveniently already had stuff in it, and not blank pages like double XLs. I read through it all. Most of it was stuff I already knew or had pieced together. There were only two parts circled that I didn't understand, though, a room number and a date. I always knew what date it was because in the lab they had a calendar, so I knew this date was still a few days away. But this room number didn't make any sense. It didn't follow the naming and numbering conventions on this floor. Right about then, it was time for the morning routine to start. Food started coming through, and the light-absorbent clad orderlies started hauling people down to the lab. We each clutched our new presents close to us unconsciously as if that would help, but the orderlies walked on by, not paying us any mind, so we got back to the routine too. Chapter 12, Beating Time, Day 2. We only got fed once a day, which wasn't as bad as it sounded since we had as much water as we could drink through our yummy, rusted, piped faucet in our cubby. Our food got carted to us on a little track system, and with some arms that shoved the food towards us, and we each picked up our food, which was wrapped up in a pocket pie sort of a thing. We each picked up our pocket of food, and it's enough to last all day. Double XL said next to me, tasty seal meat. He jumped up to the window to announce it to the mutant seals that he was having his food for the day. They made some racket at him, and he jumped back down and snickered to himself and started eating his large pie pocket. We ate, and Double XL worked on crayoning the ideal house and family and garden and livestock, and I was reading through the information in the notebook. My primary goal was to figure out what the room was, or where the room was. It didn't take too long, and eventually the meal train was done, and the last of the little cart things went away, and it was quiet again, and the sounds of eating were all that remained. I looked up, and XPX was not using his spork to eat his food pocket. I guess he wanted to use it for looking around only. I went back to my notebook work. I noticed the notebook left some parts out that I knew, so I started filling in the parts that I knew, including a map. This way it would at least be complete, because I like to make things complete. At this point, I hardly figured it would matter. The map was the easiest, so I did that first. I had determined the date could only mean one of two things. Either the date was when something horrible would happen, or the date that this had to be done by. With that in mind, I got to work completing as much of my binder as I could before the next labbing. Double XL got about halfway done with his pie pocket when it was time to go. He set his food and crayons and notebook down on his sleeping mat, stood up, and got ready. The activity was probably automatic by now due to the routine, or because they watch through the cameras and activate when the person looks ready. The three orderlies in light-absorbent material arrived right about on time. Double XL was going to get labbed. I told him to take care and said a silent prayer for him that he would survive another day. He sat there and innocently hummed to himself a tune that sounded similar to the songs I would try to sing to him during his night terrors. When they were about to leave, the orderlies noticed he didn't have his notebook. They told him to get his notebook, which he did, and then they took him away. Chapter 13, Afternoon, Day 2. I spent most of the afternoon slowly eating my food and working to fill the gaps in my notebook. Some of it was procedural stuff where steps were missing, some of it was policy stuff where pieces were missing. There were a few flowcharts with steps that pointed to the wrong spots or the wrong directions, or the decisions were wrong, so I simply fixed them all. I couldn't understand why this was so difficult, but then I realized it was probably uniquely easy for me. It was probably also because they all had full-time jobs and simply didn't have the time to do this, so it was going to be less than perfect. Some of the processes were still upsetting to read, though, even though I knew what they were already. I also noticed some processes were missing entirely, like I noticed there wasn't a process where the questions came from or where the questions went to. Although it was a tiered system and upper tiers mentioned it, but the lower tiers of processes left out those pieces. I looked up at times to notice XPX was watching me via Sporkovision, and I held up the 3-ring binder and flipped the pages and shrugged. He seemed to not know what to make of it, but looked slightly disapproved but also undecided. So I put in sub-pieces for the lower tiers when I knew our process was supposed to be and how I thought it probably worked, and kept going. There were also floor plans, but only for this floor. I noticed they included many of the areas I had suspected but never seen. Areas such as the warehouse and spots that were nondescript empty squares, which were probably the kitchen, storage rooms, or elevators. There was also an org chart, but some of the names were missing and some of the titles were missing. Unless there was a second org chart and second facility on this island, this is all there was. Everyone was male, and there was no indications of a second department. It looked like a single org chart and single facility. For the floor plan, I filled in areas that I knew, like the guard station and the elevators. I followed the track station where the food came from and figured out where the kitchen was. For the org chart, I put how many orderlies I thought there were and connected them to who I thought was in charge of them. But who the orderlies reported to didn't make sense based on the org chart. The lead doctor, which was who I spoke to at the top, ordered around the orderlies, but that didn't make sense because they only seemed to be reluctant to do what he said. Also, he had to be getting his questions from somewhere. With that, I put an empty circle above him and then a dotted line to the right with a second empty circle. I attached the orderlies to the lead doctor here anyway, only as a guess and to spark conversation. It was probably wrong, but I calculated that in being wrong, it would open up some new discussion. Also, the person above him probably wasn't physically here and probably oversaw multiple other facilities that did other styles of experimentation. The dotted line was probably to maybe more of an idea, force, or ideology, but the symbolism served its purpose anyway. With that, XXL got walked back in with his notebook. He looked about usual for when he came back from getting labbed and sat down on his mat to finish his food for the day. I guess they cursory reviewed his one picture of his house with the crayons, took notes or pictures, and that was enough for their observations of whatever that exercise was for him. Chapter 14, Trying to Get Some Sleep, Day 2. That was good timing for XXL to be back and for me to wrap up with the work in this book. It was time for me to try to catch some sleep since XXL was back to watch over me. I let him know I was going to try to crash for a little bit, and he said no problem. This was really a way of saying he was sorry that I had to deal with what was coming, and that he would help however he could. He adjusted himself to be facing me as he worked on his food some more, and had relaxed enough to start coloring again. And I got into as comfortable as a position I could, and quickly drifted off to sleep to the crashing waves on the shore and the lovely Pacific Ocean air. It wasn't too long before I was in a not too different version of the hospital hellhole, walking out of my cubby. There was a difference, though, which was in this case it was devoid of people and slightly dimmer. When I got to the edge of my cubby to the hallway, I noticed the hallway looked very different, like it was being unbalanced by something. It was like a negativity was washing through the hall that nobody could see. Right then a girl in pale white clothing walked up to me and touched me on the nose. I don't understand ghost logic at all, so I touched her on the nose back, which apparently made her happy, so away she went. I shrugged and went into the hallway, and the negativity parsed around me like it couldn't pierce me. I walked past the guard station, to which I knew that was the exit to the lobby based on the floor plans I had been looking at. I didn't need to go that way, so process of elimination told me instead to go the other direction, not towards the labs, but further into the complex. That is the way I went. The warehouse area was here, but there was also a freight elevator. The ghost child appeared next to me and said, "The bad man is in there. You want to stay away." I said, "What is your name, young one, that knows so much of this place?" "Esther," she responded. I kneeled down to speak to her respectfully. "Well, Esther, bad men don't like me very much, especially not here. However, I really appreciate your help." She raised her chin proudly with a smile and booped me on the nose again, and That's when I noticed a strangulation mark around her neck and looked down and 2 more around her wrists. I looked up at her grimly and went to poop her back again, but she was already running like children do when they got you and there isn't crap you're going to be able to do about it. So with that, I headed towards the freight elevator.